Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 19th of October 2015, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson.
Afternoon.
Well, the good news is sunny, sunshine almost everywhere, apart from, it appears, Belgium. And we've just had a little news flash in that it's cloudy in Belgium, and also a little bit overcast in Pembrokeshire, so the corgis not doing so well today. But Plymouth, very nice. We've got a new king, apparently, Mike.
Well, I don't know about new. He certainly has been under the radar for all this time, but this is Jerremy Heywood. Of course, he's head of the Civil Service and the Cabinet Office, works with Francis Maud. I mean, we have been hearing for quite some time, Brian, that Jerremy Heywood and Francis Maud are effectively running the country at the moment and telling everybody what to do. And we seem to be getting another hint of this because various news outlets, including Radio 4 Today programme, talking about a email/letter which Jerremy Heywood has sent to all ministers. And okay, it may be about a relatively minor affair, which is the third runway at Heathrow, at least in terms of sort of global politics. It may be a minor affair, but nonetheless, lots of ministers pretty annoyed that Jerremy Heywood would try to instruct them on how to behave in this way. So this is allegedly because of concerns that anything that ministers might say between now and when the report on this issue comes out in June or July, I think it's July it's coming out, that anything that ministers would say would be grounds for a legal challenge of some kind. So he's basically telling them to be quiet. Now, Theresa May was on the Radio 4 programme, Today programme this morning, and she said that she doesn't comment on leaked documents.
Okay, so we can leak a few documents, we can lose a few documents, and the government simply says, well, we're not accountable, we don't have to say anything.
But what she did say was, I'm very clear of the importance of cabinet ministers not making comments on this particular issue, such as when a decision is taken, whichever decision is taken in the end. People can complain and somehow say that it was an a priori, sorry, I have to apologise, I'm tripping over my words, an a priori decision and therefore judicially reviewed. And so, well, it doesn't change the fact that a Cabinet Office civil servant is telling ministers what to say and what to do. Absolutely.
And of course, this is one of the things that we've been hearing consistently over the last few weeks, that senior military officers are not only being told what they can and can't say, but they're also being ignored and being treated, one person said, as if they were dirt by junior civil servants. And these are the same people, Mike, of course, that are running the Behavioural Insights Team. So using applied psychology without the public's consent or indeed knowledge in order to change the way that the public acts and believes. These are pretty dangerous people altogether.
Yes, and they generally try to stay under the radar.
Yes.
But, as I say, the true King of England, perhaps.
We've got a question in the chat box about who he is at the moment.
Very good question, isn't it?
Well, we're coming on the same question as Francis Maud. We don't actually know the jobs these people do anymore. They're simply buried in the civil service running the show. We'll come back onto that.
Yeah.
Well, some interesting stuff popping up both in Russia today and also the Times over the weekend. And all of a sudden, it seems that a few people in the military in particular are starting to ask, what on earth are we doing bringing the Chinese, still known as a hostile overseas power, why are we bringing the Chinese in order to build the next generation of nuclear power stations, and are there security risks to this? Now, it's quite remarkable. There's been no proper debate over this in Parliament. We've just seen David Cameron saying, I think it's a good idea to bring the Chinese in to build nuclear power stations. So we're admitting that our nuclear infrastructure is virtually broken down. We know that power supply problems are likely this winter. We simply bring in a hostile overseas power to rebuild these. We presumably, Mike, haven't got any of our own people to to run this sort of program.
Well, that seems to be the case. We've got to remember, of course, this is a joint venture with the French as well. So if you think that the Chinese are a security threat, then what's your assessment of the French involvement in this?
A bigger threat than the Chinese might. Well, let's have a look at this statement here. It says that security sources have expressed alarm at giving the People's Republic of China such intimate access to Britain's energy infrastructure, warning the UK could be rushing into an agreement with Beijing without considering the threats. There's a big division between the money men and the security side, a security source told The Times. The Treasury is in the lead and it isn't listening to anyone. They see China as an opportunity, but we see the threat. So how remarkable that the Treasury is overriding national security. That's got to be treason to start off with. I wonder whether Mr. Heywood is involved in that little area. But what also caught my attention was who is commenting in this Russia Today article. And we've got a gentleman called Raffaello Pantucci, and he's from the Royal United Services Institute. Now, we've pointed out these people before, constantly being used in the mainstream media as supposedly informed sources. So we don't get comment by the Secretary of Defence, we don't get comment by somebody from the British Security Services, we get a think tank. So let's have a look at this gentleman. LinkedIn gives quite a lot on his background, so don't just believe what we're saying to you now, go and check it yourself. He says his career has mostly been in the think tank industry, but I've done freelance journalism and tailored research for the private sector. I'm open to commissions for both. So what's this man's qualification, do you think, Mike, to be talking about anything to do with China coming in and hoovering up our infrastructure?
I seem to find that as we look through these think tanks and the people that represent them, that they generally don't have too many qualifications for the area that they generally discuss.
Well, I'd say so. If we have a look at this man, well, what's he got? We've got some interesting stuff here. Basically, the Shanghai Academy of Social Sciences. Well, that's pretty useful, I should think, with nuclear infrastructure and defence. So we've got a research associate in the beginning, Centre for Strategic and International Studies, London Director of Operations Young Professionals, we'll come back to them, International Institute for Strategic Studies, the visiting scholar at the Shanghai Academy of Social Sciences. They've got some pretty interesting social science in China, haven't they? I think it's usually body parts, human rights and chopping people's heads off. Yeah, okay, we'll move on from that. Senior Research Fellow at the Royal United Services Institute, and then a Director of International Security Studies. So we thought we'd just have a little look at this young professionals in foreign policy. So you can have a look at the website yourself. Here we are, mission and vision. The mission is to foster the next generation of foreign policy leaders by promoting young professionals with the knowledge, skills, exposure and relationships to tackle critical global challenges over the course of their careers. Well, that sounds like a good club, Mike. How do you think you get into that?
By invitation, I would imagine.
Absolutely right. If you're going to become one of their global leaders, then you've got to be selected. You've also got to pay a bit of money. But this is the whole point. Who are these people? They're acting with no authority at all, and what they're being asked to comment on, absolutely vital stuff for the safety of UK. Well, if that was Russia Today, let's have a look at the BBC, because the same thing applies. Here's the article, Security Fears Over China's Nuclear Power Deal. The BBC fails to ask the question as to why there's been no proper debate in Westminster over this very serious issue. They have a little picture about Bradwell nuclear power plant, which stopped producing in 2002. This, of course, is what we've just mentioned, a potential crisis looming with a lack of generation capacity in UK. And here's the little question. How concerned should we be? It's a very gentle one, isn't it? Should we have a few worries that we're bringing in a hostile foreign power to look after our strategic infrastructure? Well, you need somebody with capability to comment, and here is the lady. Caroline Baylon, a cyber security specialist at Chatham House think tank, says Chinese investment's a good thing. So that's promising. She says it's good for the UK, but when it comes to very sensitive sectors of the economy, we have to be very, very careful. Some argue that China would not attack its own nuclear plants, she tells BBC News, but it could obtain access to UK technologies that would give it an insight into any vulnerabilities in critical infrastructure systems. So that's this is an expert talking.
Is it?
Well, we didn't think so. We went to Chattam House to have a little look at her background. She is the Research Associate, Science, Technology and Cyber Security in the International Security Department at Chattam House, where she specialises in cyber security, internet governance and the science and technology aspects of international security. So let's have a look at those in more simplistic terms. Here they are: cybersecurity, cybercrime, internet governance, privacy and defence policy. How old do you think she is? 30, 32?
Careful.
Well, I'm just wonder whether this lady has got quite the experience she says. Well, if we look into her background, we needn't worry because she's got a degree, a BA in economics, and she's got an MSc in social science of the internet. And she's now talking about defence policy. Here's the MSc in social science. And this one is interesting. She was Vice President of the Centre for Strategic Decision Research. Well, what's that, we wondered. So we had a little look, and a very strange website, but you've got a group of people at very high level debating everything to do with international relationships, global defence, the internet, etc. It's a mixture of politicians, military, and very big firms like Lockheed Martin. What are they doing? Well, I don't know quite, but have a look at this because we found two names, Roger-Weissinger-Baylon and the lady herself. So putting that in context, and this is a little bit of information on that gentleman, here he is, Chairman, 30th International Workshop on Global Security. Originally, he was working at Stanford University, and then he was the founder of the Centre for Strategic Decision Research. Stay with me because it does get interesting. And where does that go? Well, we found some documents here where we've got a Roger-Weissinger-Baylon and we've also got an Anne. Now, I don't know, but this is a very interesting mix of names. We're just going to ask the question, what is the relationship between these people? But it would appear that
a family enterprise.
A family enterprise where this, I'm going to say, young lady is now advising Britain on how we should deal with the Chinese and our nuclear industry.
Excellent.
Chattam House couldn't give me any more details. When we tried to call this lady direct, she wasn't at the end of her phone. But let's just have a look at the sort of people involved in that Centre for Strategic Decision Research. A little bit of a video clip here just to show you some of the people. We've got His Excellency Jean-Yves Le Drian, Minister of Defence of France, President of the Italian Republic, Italian Minister of Defence, so it goes on. Well, it really does go on. Just have a look at this lot.
Who have we got?
We've got more defence people from France, and you'll see in a minute. This is a whole mixture of NATO people, government ministers, defence people, and Lithuania. It's a very strange mix of individual people high up in NATO, high up in the US military. You can see some of the uniforms there, and these people are apparently having conferences on global security. So I'm going to sum this up and say just what is going on here. We've got unknown people being used to comment on serious UK matters of defence and security in place of accountable politicians and civil servants.
Yeah.
There's something very interesting at hand here. We're not being given the truth. We're not seeing the debate in Parliament. We've just got these think tank people.
Because we're demolishing our institutions and replacing them with the big society, right? This is a form of participatory democracy where, of course, it's not individuals that participate in democratic decisions. It's think tanks, NGOs, and other non-profit organisations.
Indeed. And we can then follow the money for who is funding those, and we come to, for example, George Soros. So we're seeing something quite remarkable in British press. We've got unknown people commenting on areas they shouldn't be commenting on.
Well, it gets better. David Cameron tweeted this out today, and he gives the game away, of course, and this reflects what he said several months ago when he was making a speech to the UN. He stated that, of course, he could not separate Islamic extremism from those, for example, who believe in that 9/11 or 7/7 were inside jobs. That's what he said at the time. And today he's tweeting out, the government's new counter-extremism strategy launches today to confront and defeat all forms of extremism. So let's just keep this in mind. He's talking here all forms of extremism. Now, in order to make us feel better, they're also pushing out this kind of nonsense, building a stronger Britain together. This is tweeted out with earlier on today with referring to the same counter-extremism strategy that's been launched today. And David Cameron seems to be suggesting that he can write, or maybe somebody's written this for him, because this blog post on LinkedIn, building a national coalition against extremism, and he is claiming that 2 weeks ago he set out a vision for Britain that overcame not only its economic problems but its social ones too. I presume he's talking about his great speech at the Conservative Party conference where they began
with the music.
But even before the music, they had 10 minutes of sheer propaganda on the screens in the conference centre telling them what a great job David Cameron was doing, and then they had the music introducing him to give his speech, and it was very much reflective of a Nuremberg rally is what we thought. But anyway, so 2 weeks he set out that vision, and he goes on here to say, subversive, well-organised and sophisticated in their methods, Islamist extremists don't just threaten our security, they jeopardise all that we've built together, our successful multiracial, multi-faith democracy. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but constitutionally anyway, this is not a multi-faith democracy.
Well, it wasn't.
No.
It seems to have been drifted in. And
this is one of these things that's been drifted in without any discussion or anybody's consent. But anyway, so we have to confront them, everywhere we find them. Now, it's quite interesting because at the end of this blog post, there was one comment, and the comment was from Greg, and he said, all good points, and I applaud any attempt to take the lead in tackling this situation, but why focus on any one group of extremists when there are extremists from all faiths and all walks of life? And he finishes off by saying, an approach which identifies one group as the monopolizer of evil could easily lead to extremism against that group. And of course, that's part of what is going on here. Aside from the fact that this extremism coalition, this national coalition against extremism, is about tackling much more than Islamic extremism. The focus is going to remain on Islamic extremism with a view to sort of building up tensions with the Islamic community. But anyway, of course, this strategy also includes £5 million of support for local initiatives, campaigns and charities to counter extremist ideologies. And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, but everywhere we see this type of money going into local initiatives, campaigns and charities that are there to counter something, it usually results. Am I being unfair in saying this?
I think it's absolutely right. Every time they say they're going to help prevent the extremism, what seems to happen is the extremism starts growing. And we've also, of course, over recent weeks have had discussions with retired officers from the Met Police simply talking about how the anti-terrorism operations were clearly inflaming extremist views. So something very dirty going on in the background, I think.
Indeed, and I'll just end on this point by saying they also announced that the strategy also strengthens the role of the Disclosure and Barring Service to ensure anyone with a conviction or civil order for terrorist or extremist activity is automatically banned from working with children and vulnerable people in the same way as individuals convicted of sexual offences against children. Around 5,000 children were in institutions affected by the Trojan horse plot, where extremists gained control of several schools in Birmingham. Separate barred lists are maintained for work with children and work with adults. So let's just remind us what the Disclosure and Barring Service is going to ensure that anyone with a conviction or civil order for terrorist or extremist activity is automatically barred from working with children. I'm going to ask...
Well, they're going to leave the paedophiles in there. They're just going to ban the extremists. So you bring in the named person scheme north of the border, where we've had our first child abuse person exposed. I believe there's at least another 4 or 5 of those people to be... Don't worry about the paedophiles, but concentrate on the terrorism. Extremism.
Yes. Okay. Tony Blair, yeah, we're going to focus on Stuart Hooper for 21st Century Wire here, who I think broke this before the mainstream media had it today, if it's not really hugely widely covered, specifically the Hillary Clinton aspect of it. But anyway, so this is Bush and Blair's Iraq war dealings exposed by the Hillary Clinton email scandal. So they basically, Hillary, of course, was running her own email server, and she was trying to hide her dealings with various people by not storing her emails on government email servers. Stuart's saying a newly published email has revealed the deal in blood made by Bush and Blair 1 year before the invasion of Iraq took place. At the time, Blair was telling British voters, "We are not proposing military action," and he was claiming he was trying to reach a diplomatic solution. But this email suggests something quite different was going on behind the scenes. It states, "Blair continues to stand by you and the US as we move forward on the war on terrorism and on Iraq." And what that means, Stuart's saying, is that Blair not only knew that war was coming, but that he was intending to support it. It is interesting that most of the other outlets, most of the other media outlets, as I was discussing, are missing or forgetting the fact that the email emerged from Hillary Clinton and the ongoing email scandal that is going on in the States over this. And Stuart ends up by asking, is this going to affect Hillary's campaign? Well, that remains to be seen, but more importantly, it should be affecting the possibility of Tony Blair ending up in The Hague, which is something that many, many people would like to see. So is it a coincidence then that none other than the true King of England is the very man who is being accused of delaying the Chillcot inquiry report? This is Jerremy Heywood again, head of the Civil Service, and he denies, of course, that he is involved in any kind of cover-up with Chillcot. And we, just as a reminder, that inquiry was established in 2009, still no date for the publication of the final report, although, as we've said before, the families of people that were affected by this are hoping that he will finally report by Christmas, and in fact, if he doesn't, they intend to take some legal action. But nonetheless, Jerremy Heywood, accused of attempting to slow down the report by blocking the release of government documents, including correspondence between Tony Blair and George Bush. So it must be pretty embarrassing for them that this particular email has come to light.
I think this could do some major damage, Mike, and one of the papers was reporting over the weekend that, of course, the Chillcot inquiry had never asked for that material anyway. So they just had ignored the possibility of these sorts of emails existing. Now this has come to the surface. I think it must have destroyed the Chillcot inquiry completely.
Well, quite possible, I hope so. But Heywood anyway said, "It frustrates me a little bit, to be honest, that I'm being accused of trying to get in the way or covering things up, because that is absolutely not the way in which I've approached it."
No, what, he didn't want to be caught?
Yeah. Indeed.
Oh dear. Yeah.
Oh dear. Right. So financial stuff then. UK National Risk Assessment of Money Laundering and Terrorist Financing. Quite interesting. So the government has published this anti-money laundering assessment, and they're saying that that the announcement of this builds on the steps that the government already took to improve its anti-money laundering and counter-terrorist finance regimes including by launching the Economic Crime Command in the National Crime Agency in 2013, publishing a UK anti-corruption plan in 2014, strengthening the confiscation scheme under the Proceeds of Crime Act, introducing reporting process, improving transparency and accountability of supervision and enforcement in the UK, building asset confiscation enforcement, and so on. I mean, it's just nonsense. But this report highlights that UK banks are, quotes, highly vulnerable to money laundering, and the usual phrase that ends in the word Sherlock kind of springs to mind here, because I mean, we know that this has been going on for 150 years.
Highly vulnerable means they're doing it.
They're doing it, yes. Yeah. And we know that. And let's face it, the Western financial system is mainly being kept afloat through the various money laundering, particularly of drugs money from Afghanistan and Central America. So it should have come as no surprise that UK banks, now of course what is going to happen here, how is this going to end up? Well, of course the large-scale money laundering that this report is talking about will not be dealt with in any way, shape or form. What we're going to see instead is a further crackdown on the use of money by individuals, and of course more hoops to be jumped through. We already have to jump through some pretty significant hoops in order to use our money through banks at the moment. You know, you want to take some money out to buy a car, what do you want it for? And you've got to sort of demonstrate what it's going to be used for because of anti-money laundering legislation.
Done publicly in front of the queue of other people waiting at the bank, of course.
Indeed.
The questions being asked.
Indeed,
yeah.
But no big questions being asked of HSBC. They get fined from once in a while for money laundering. But,
as you do.
But, you know, don't need to worry about it other than that. Mm. A further attack on the minds of children. This is, I think, quite incredible, because we're seeing children of ever younger ages being hit with this kind of stuff. Sexist words your children are no longer allowed to use at school. Children as young as 5, according to the Telegraph here, are going to be admonished for using language that enforces gender stereotypes, as new guidelines are sent to every school in England this Tuesday, so that'll be tomorrow. They're not allowed to use phrases such as man up or go make me a sandwich, apparently, and head teachers are being urged to ensure that sexist language is taken as seriously as racist language. Yeah. So further,
this is really going for the minds of the children, Mike. This is control of a immense degree.
Yes, incredible. Now, was it? Sorry, were you going to say something?
I was just going to say, of course, you know, these guidelines have come in. The critical thing for the public to be asking is, who created the guidelines? They didn't just come out of government. They didn't just come out of the civil service. Somebody, a named person or persons, sat in an office and created this agenda. And I would say what we need to know is, who were those people? So if you're keen on a freedom of information before that's closed down by the government, would be interesting to find out who created this policy. Mm.
Now, over the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about the steady privatisation of the police. Mm. We've seen, last week we reported on the fact that Lincolnshire Police and Crime Commissioner are very concerned about the reduction in funds for the police service there. We know that there are going to be a further 500 redundancies at Devon and Cornwall. And so this goes on. And we talked about how the centre of Plymouth City is going to be policed by a private company, a very strange little private company that didn't exist 18 months ago, and yet is now receiving multi-million-pound contracts for this. And so I just wanted to highlight this organisation, and thanks to the person who sent this to us. Your technical partner, TSG Policing. Now, I thought it was against the law to represent yourself as the police.
Indeed. I also noticed the number ends in 999,
Indeed.
Which I find, yeah, so this is...
So we're seeing these types of companies spring up now.
Yeah.
And we're seeing how their websites are really propagandizing their equipment. And of course, as the point we made last week was, where are the protections for individuals whenever you've got companies driven by profit motive, running the jobs that police are supposed to be doing, or doing the jobs that the police are supposed to be doing? There is no accountability in this. Of course, these companies will not be subject to the Freedom of Information Act now. In fact, Martin Brighton in Sheffield would tell you that if a service that was normally provided by a public body is outsourced to another company, that in fact they would fall under the auspices of the Freedom of Information Act. But of course, the question is whether the Information Commissioner would actually enforce that, and I think previous experiences probably wouldn't. So nonetheless, we're seeing more and more of these security companies springing up and pretending to be police. And I think this is a very dangerous situation because, again, it's happening under the radar without any kind of national debate, and it's certainly not being discussed in Parliament. So this needs to be stopped.
And we need as many people to be asking questions about it. Well, if that's happening in general with the police, perhaps this Guardian article says that there's now an attack on the MOD police, because all of a sudden we've discovered that hundreds of officers in the MOD, those around defence of the nuclear submarines, are being investigated for a whole range of offences. So they say here that figures released under Freedom of Information Act show that 170 officers, more than 6% of the 2,700 employed by the MOD, are being investigated for a raft of possible disciplinary and criminal offences. Now, I think this just leads to one place, Mike, and this is that they are going to try and privatise now key areas of the MOD police. We've already got military bases with civilian guards around them. You start to raise these issues of dedication, accountability, responsibility, and now here we are further. Well, I think this is doing two things, of course, because it's helping to undermine the nuclear deterrent because, it's not safe because the police are not safe. But this is surely going to be, well, we're going to have to privatise these people because they can't behave themselves. Blatant.
Absolutely. Okay, tonight Ian Crane is back, glad to say. 7:30 tonight. He'll be speaking to Mel Kelly, who's as he calls her, the outstanding, and I agree with this completely, outstanding Scottish researcher. And focus with Ian on Scotland at the moment, as we sort of have a focus on Scotland, because Scotland is becoming the pilot for so many of these sort of draconian police state schemes that we see at the moment. So Scotland definitely the focus, and that's 7:30 tonight. Fracking Nightmare, of course, at 9 p.m. Do join us for those. What's next?
Well, what's next is really the subject of propaganda. We decided to pick on the Express for this little lot here, but have a look at this headline. Here we are, War Games. Britain defies Putin with deployment of 900 troops along the Russian border. But we also saw in the headlines some very interesting things. So we got Russian Navy ready to wipe out Islamic State militants. We've got this one, World War III threat. Ex-Navy chief calls presence of the Russian SAMs in Syria highly dangerous. World War III on the brink. And we've got this one, European leaders admit EU is developing an army much faster than we thought. So there's lots of things there to catch your eye, but Putin threat. Well, we just thought we'd have a look at this Russian Navy one. And this is based on the fact that earlier in the week, Putin blasted the US for refusing to hand over intelligence about ISIS targets. I'm just going to say to our viewers and listeners, listen to what Mr. Putin's actually said. He said, we asked on the military level to give us, this is essentially for the British American, give us the targets which they consider to be the terrorist ones for sure, 100%. But the answer was no, we're not ready to do that. Then we thought and asked another question, then could you tell us where we should not hit? Again, no answer. So what should we do? So we have been told over weeks and months, years, that we should all be terrified of dying in our bed due to these terrible terrorists in Syria. When Putin says, okay, I've got the gear, I'm ready to go, all of a sudden we can't tell him where they are or what we want to do. There can only be one reason for that, Mike, of course, is that the West can't tell Putin where these terrorists are because they created them and paid for them and trained them, so they don't actually want them destroyed.
Well, that's one part of it. The other part of it is, of course, they were hoping, and they continue to hope, that Putin will commit some kind of atrocity, similar to the fact that to what Obama did with the Médecins Sans Frontières hospital, which, by the way, they still insist was an absolutely intentional strike. It was not by accident. So, you know, Britain and America hoping that Putin would do something which would give them headline propaganda. That hasn't happened, to their embarrassment, and instead it's them that have been showing up, talking about Obama and Cameron, that have been showing up as being willing to go around bombing hospitals. Yeah, nice situation.
Well, here's the next one. This is about the EU army. European leaders admit the EU army is developing much faster than people believe. Well, for that to be true, either the press and media are not doing their job, or this is being done covertly. It's a deceitful program. What they're saying is, under the latest proposals, a common European-wide army will become a force capable of taking on missions of higher intensity and even replace national guards at EU borders. Well, I thought we got rid of the borders, Mike. I thought we got rid of the borders, and now we're being told not only have we not got rid of the borders and we're going to fingerprint British people, we're now going to militarise those borders. This is a dictatorship which is coming in by the hour, never mind the day. Yes. So the added comment here was bureaucrats in Brussels are trying to capitalise on concerns over, here it is, Russian aggression and the migrant crisis to push through the long-held ambitions for a European army. So we've got the truth being drifted in here. This is nudging people towards just acceptance. Those nasty Russians doing all the aggression, and there's a migrant crisis. No mention that we created the crisis, but what's coming now, we're going flat out for the European army. Now, in this article, there was this, which I thought was just extraordinary. Here we are, we've got David Cameron cozying up to Merkel on that wonderful yellow sofa. And what does it say underneath? It says this: Merkel may blackmail Cameron into supporting an EU army if he wants to renegotiate any EU treaty. And I'm going to say we're now really starting to understand what the Prime Minister's little pig abuse episode was, or the child abuse in Westminster. Here the press, the media openly acknowledging that Cameron can be blackmailed.
Well, we did say this 2 months ago, that when Cameron was doing his little tour of European leaders, that the European army was going to be one of the things that would be the price for the renegotiation of the EU treaty. So nobody should be fooled about this. Anybody that's intending to campaign for a no vote at the referendum, this is going to be a done deal by then. There will be some bones thrown towards Britain as part of so-called renegotiation of EU treaties, but in return for that, we are going to see further federalisation, the creation of a Foreign Office, the creation of a Treasury, and as we've been saying here for months, if not years, the creation of an EU army. Finally, that's breaking into the mainstream news. It's about time they caught up.
It is, but more people watching the column. So this was the third one. Here we've got it. World War III threat. Ex-Navy chief calls the presence of Russia's SAMs in Syria extremely dangerous. Well, who is this joker? If I remember correctly, this is Sir Alan West, Lord West now, former Navy chief. Happened to be in post when the Navy brought in Satanism as an approved religion for use on board warships. Don't know whether he was connected, but it's an interesting question. And this is what he said. He said, ISIL doesn't have any aircraft that it's using, and I'm sure Russia doesn't intend to shoot down Syrian government aircraft, so one must wonder what exactly they're for. Well, that's a pretty astute little bit of wondering. I think the Russian aircraft, Lord West, are there to protect the Russian military from the very dangerous Western forces who are funding the terrorists in the first place. But Lord West doesn't seem to get that. It says risks have already been identified by the European Union's aviation experts because of rockets being fired from the Caspian Sea by Russian warships, and fears were mentioned by commercial aircraft yesterday in the report by Dutch investigators into Downing. So here's the spin. The Russians shot down MH17, Russian missile, therefore the Russians shot it down. And because they've put their SAM systems into Syria, well, they're nasty people, and it's just outrageous. Meanwhile, what's the British public getting rammed home? Well, this, I've used the word dross quite a lot because it's a polite way of saying utter rubbish. War games, Britain defies Putin with deployment of 900 troops along the Russian border. Britain defies Putin with a deployment of 900 troops. And we've got the deployment of a company-sized detachment numbering around 100 personnel was part of a more persistent presence by NATO forces in Eastern Europe. That's what Mr. Fallon, the Defence Secretary, said. This is just utter nonsense. So we're dismantling the British military under cover of lies and propaganda, while at the same time we're promoting the European army. We don't have to make it up. It's all there when we know where to look at it. And we're just coming with this on the Mail. Now, this story I'd really like people to read because there is so much in it. What an insult. Soldier who lost his leg in friendly fire is paid $50,000, but the officer accused of shooting him gets $500,000 for the stress of the injury. Now, if you get into the article, the soldier is shot in the leg by a machine gun operated by a British Army captain, friendly fire incident. He's paid $50,000 for the loss of his leg. But the officer, the captain who shoots him, we can just bring him in as a picture. Here he is, Captain Henderson. He actually took on the Ministry of Defence because at the time there were problems not only with those automatic weapons, but also the Warrior vehicle that he was in. So he took on the Ministry of Defence, caused them a lot of problems, and ultimately he was given a big payoff. So it says here, weapons expert Warren Lister, who gave evidence on Captain Henderson's behalf, accused the mod of a cover-up, saying in 2003, the Warrior and the machine gun were mechanically dangerous. The mod settled his case so none of the technical evidence would come out. So that's the heart of it. But I'm just going to say, think about what this article does. We've got victimisation of the victim. We've got the creation of angst between the ranks, officers and ordinary ranks. We're demeaning the military in the public eye. That's going to help suppress recruiting. And then we've got, once again, the cover-up of the dangerous neglect, military personnel and equipment. So we are seeing unbelievably callous and cynical things being played out in order to destroy us as a nation state.
Bring us into the European army?
Indeed. Well, we're just about on time there. I will just say very briefly that Melanie Shaw has had her eviction for tomorrow placed on hold by Nottingham City Homes. It appears they're having a rethink and may offer other accommodation. And I'd also like to say that the Goddard CSA Enquiry seems to have refused to say who operated the IT systems from where the data was lost. This is an important question, or we think so, because we believe those systems were operated by the Home Office. So it's not Goddard losing the information, it's Theresa May's own office mysteriously losing child abuse evidence.
There's no precedent for that.
Perhaps it's gone to Merkel. I'll just leave people with that thought. Thanks very much for joining us. We'll be back same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.